Hi guys, it's Chris speaking. Welcome back. Today I'm going to be talking about guilt. Now, I could sit here and talk to you about guilt all day and all the ways that it manifests in our brains and throughout our lives during transition in particular. It is something that I want to talk to in relation to transitioning as someone who's well out of their teenage years. So I started my social transition at 27 and 26, 27, and my physical transition at 28. Yes, that is my dog in the background. Hi. Woo! Got distracted. So coming out at 26 is questioning and sort of, I guess, starting a physical transition at 28. There was a lot of steps that were involved, but I'd done a lot of living up until that point, so I was well into my third decade. Now, I want to quickly put a disclaimer out there that I'm talking about guilt from a personal experience. It's not going to be everyone's experience. Maybe you can relate to some of it, maybe you can't, but I just want to say that it's okay to feel guilty about your past. And there's a lot of things that you probably feel guilty about. I know that I felt guilty about quite a lot of things, and I still do to this day. I'm only sort of 9 months on teen now, so I'm still pretty early in that medical transition stage. I want to talk about a particular area of guilt which is relevant to my story, and that is guilt with identifying as a lesbian and identifying with lesbian content and enjoying lesbian content, because now I'm coming into this world, or I've come into this world as a man, and looking back on that, there's a lot of questioning and imposter syndrome and things that come up from my past, and that's something that has had to be worked through gender therapy and therapy in my own time. I should probably put a content warning out there as well. I am going to be talking about my life as when I identified as a lesbian, and I'm going to be talking about, female anatomy and female body parts, which is the same thing. Good job, Chris. But if you're uncomfortable with that sort of thing, then it may be worthwhile not watching this video. Or if you are curious but dysphoric, then flag it for later. I came out as a man, and there were still things on my bookshelf that I wanted to read. There were still movies that I wanted to watch, and that's because I'd thrown myself so heavily into this lesbian identity. And, I was like, I like women, so I want to watch women, not in like a gross way. Maybe a gross way. And, I wanted to read this content. So I had a Sarah Waters book on my bookshelf, whatever her latest one was, Playing for Keeps or something along those lines. And I looked at it shortly after coming out, and I had this wave of guilt come through me, because I was like, oh shit, I can't like that stuff anymore because I'm not a lesbian. I don't identify as a lesbian, therefore I shouldn't be looking at any sort of lesbian content. I, like all young lesbians, watched the L Word religiously when I sort of came out into that world and was growing up as a young lesbian, just liking women and the drama and boobs. So I had a whole lot of guilt around that, and I think that wave of imposter syndrome and that wave of guilt came about, and it was like, oh, can I not be a trans man because I identified as a lesbian for so long? So it was about a decade of identifying that way before coming out as a man. I, immediately felt guilty for ever liking, reading, or watching that content. It was a weird time, and it still gets me sometimes, because I had things on my list of, like my watch list on all the streaming services that were directly related to it being lesbian content. I was like, oh, well, I want to watch LGBTQ stories that were mainly just women based. So I watched Disobedience the last time that I had a day off, and I just sat down and I watched movies, and I was like, you know what? No, I am going to watch this movie because I am genuinely interested in it. Doesn't matter that there are lesbians in it. It mattered. But anyway, I sat down and watched it. The movie was great. I highly recommend the movie as just something to watch. A bit of a weird sex scene. Not sure about spitting in people's mouths, but that's not my thing. Anyway, but I felt guilty immediately afterwards because I had watched that content. And I was like, is this going to come up every time that I watch anything with a lesbian in it? I watched the new L Word for a different reason. I watched the new one because they had a trans storyline in it, and I was interested in the trans storyline. It helped that there were boobs, not gonna lie. That was such a gross dude thing to say. I'm sorry for everyone. But, you know, I was interested in that sort of, I guess, representation. So, it's okay to feel guilty, but you also don't have to feel guilty. You identified, or for me, this is something that I told myself, I identified really heavily in that lesbian, you know, community for a decade. That was what I knew for a decade. I didn't have the narrative to know that I was trans, or even if I had some sort of indications, or I, you know, was like, oh, that doesn't feel super comfortable in the feminine sense, what if it was a man? And there were definitely times in my life when I, you know, I feel like I should have known because of... Okay, bye. I should have known because, yeah, but that's another video that I can make with stupid things that came up in my past when you're like, oh, yep, that was a thing. This video was messy. I'll admit that, and I'm sorry for those watching it. The reason it was messy is because I felt guilt as I was talking about it, and it was weird to sort of deal with in the moment. I think for me in particular, looking back on that part of my life and the things that I used to watch and the things that I used to read and the things that I used to listen to, because I was so heavily invested in the lesbian community and wanting to make myself the, I guess, the best lesbian I could be, is that a thing? And then feeling guilty if I didn't hit any of those marks in that world, it just sort of came to a point where imposter syndrome kicked in, and I was like, well, does this mean I'm not trans? I obviously like lesbians, so why can't I just be a lesbian and be happy? Remember, for me, and for anyone else going through this situation, it does come back to the narrative that you've lived. You may not have been exposed to transition before you clicked on a YouTube video. You may not have been exposed until you met someone and started asking questions for yourself. It's all about how you're living in that moment. I was living as a lesbian, and I thought that I was comfortable as a lesbian in that time. That part of my life isn't now separate from who I am now. It's just another chapter in my story, and it might just be another chapter in yours. I know for sure that I'm so much more comfortable in my body and in my brain now that I've started this journey, and that guilt will need to be put aside because it's nothing to be guilty about. It's just another part. I'm going to stop rambling. I apologize for all the rambling. If you liked the rambling, hit this button, the button that looks like this. And if you want to subscribe for more rambling, then click the subscribe button. My face will be on the bottom of the screen. Oh, goodbye. Yeah, we're done.